Thanks, Sally, and adding to the welcome to everybody, and it looks like a great program, so well done to the group that's pulled that together, and certainly appreciate the efforts that go into these sorts of days. So I'm going to pretty quickly whip through a few of the high-level pieces around where MLA's at the moment, but also there's a few key things keen that we're communicating about some of the fundamental shifts we've made in how we're approaching particularly some of the research and development and the strategic approach to the R&D as well. So I'll quickly get through that and hopefully we'll have a bit of time for questions if there are any. Otherwise, it'll just give Ian a head start on his section in the program. So I'll talk a bit about the strategy, a bit about supply and demand, and there's some really good messages in that about impact of the work that's already been done. Some of our key programs, and then some of the future focus, and a bit about information that's available. It's important for us to remember that there's a whole bunch that sits behind the reasons why we do things. So there's a Red Meat 2030 strategic plan. It's a 10-year strategic plan that the industry signed off on nearly 2 years ago now. So we're in the second year of that program, and it's got these 6 pillars, which are the key focus areas or priorities for the red meat sector over the next 10 years. So these feed into the things that we look at, and our strategic plan is actually focused on the same 6 things. So there's a 10-year industry plan, our 5-year plan, and then we have these annual investment plans. So we're in our second annual investment plan that lines up back to the strategic plan. So one of the reasons why this is so important is that we look at what's happened over the last 22 or 3 years since MLA has been in existence, and the industry is fundamentally different. It's fundamentally different to what it was 22 years ago. And in that period of time, we've done about 13,000 projects. Right? So you draw the supply chain from here's a bull and here's a steak with a punter in a restaurant, and you put 13,000 dots on it. Doesn't matter how long you draw the line, there's not much space left. So it's pretty hard to argue that we haven't done something about everything. So we don't need more, right? We don't need a whole bunch of more stuff. What we need to do is identify the things that are going to be impactful. And we've got some really good evidence of that. So everyone's really excited about what's happened the last couple of years with the markets and the prices and the way things have been going. And there's some really interesting conversations going on. And I think we're getting better this year, but last year when things really took off, one of the things I was most surprised by was the inability of the analysts to adjust to the new world. So we came out of the 18-19 droughts, and so much of the discussion around price was price is going to come down. Now, the only reason why people were saying the price was going to come down was because it had gone up. Now, if that's the case, that means our most sophisticated approach to price analysis is gravity. And I'd hope we're a bit more sophisticated than that as an industry, which we are, right? Because people talk about the prices changing material in 20 and 21, but they actually didn't. They changed in 18. Because we came through the 2 worst years known to man as far as agriculture, environmental conditions are concerned. We've had 2 lots of 3 dry years over the last 250 or whatever, but they're the 2 driest together, right? So the 2 worst years, and it was the widespread nature of it that made it worse. But through that whole period, every single one of our commodity prices were at or above 5-year averages. We had the highest turn-off of livestock that we've seen, certainly in our lives, and arguably back to, you've got to go back a long way to find the same level of turn-off. And we've seen much, much less impactful events have a hugely detrimental impact on price. So increase in turn-off, which is increase in supply, historically has had a massive negative impact on pricing. But we didn't see that. We come through our worst 2 years and our prices are at or above 5-year averages. And of course we come out of that and surprise, surprise, the prices keep going up. So there's 2 chunks of things that have contributed to it. So one is the global thematics, and I'll come back to that in a sec. But the first one is the bit that none of us actually should be surprised by, because this has actually been part of the plan. So you go back 22 years, we didn't have a traceability system at all. So we had a tail tagging system that kind of worked. So now we've got individual traceability system. Whether you support it or not, or how good you think it is irrelevant. So we have individual traceability system, we have a mob-based traceability system, flock-based traceability system for sheep. We have an eating quality program which allows us to guarantee quality of our product regardless of its background, so from the highest quality Wagyus all the way through to cows. When MLA was formed, we had one free trade agreement with New Zealand, right? Not a hugely sophisticated trading partner. We now have 16, right? 16 free trade agreements. So we've gone from a commodity product, which we sold into a market with limited access and significant constraint, to a high quality, guaranteed, consistent, traceable product, which we're now selling into the highest quality markets with preferential access. Right. So we now have much better market information, we have much better price transparency, we have much better understanding of the supply chain. So we shouldn't be surprised that the industry is actually more successful, because this has actually been part of the plan, like it's always been the plan. We're just seeing the benefits of the investments that the industry's made more broadly. You overlay that with the global thematics, and yes, a big chunk of our price growth in the last 12 or 18 months has been driven by available supply. But the bigger drivers are actually the global thematics. So we've got an increase in demand for protein globally. So there's a projection over the next 10 years for global protein demand to go up another 5%. It's a $310 million pool. It's going to go up another 5%. We've got an increase in affluence in our key markets, particularly our key high value markets, so particularly the growing Asian markets. We've got, like I said, more preferential access to high quality markets. And so for some perspective, the UK FTA, when it comes into force, which will be in a year or 18 months, on day one, with that first chunk of access that we get, and we've got a 10-year runway to having a fully liberalised access to the market, on day one it provides $1 billion worth of market access for us, on day one. So on day one, when the UK Free Trade Agreement starts up, that gives us more access than the largest volume that we've sent in any one given year to the whole of Europe in the last 50 years. So the world is very, very different. So you add on to this as well African swine fever, which has pulled 50 million tonnes of protein out of the supply system in the last 2 years. So we've got all the stuff that, as an industry, we've been working on, which is now coming to the fore, coming to pass, being implemented, and we've got these global thematics as well. So the industry's in incredibly, incredibly good shape. So when we think about what do we focus on and what we look at going forward, we can't afford to just be answering interesting questions anymore. Right? You look at the 18-19 period, and you can come up with 5 or 6 big things that actually drove that change. Traceability, eating quality, quality assurance, trade access, market information. Then it kind of gets a bit skinny after that. You can make up a few more to get to 10 if that makes you feel better to get to double digits, but really it's only 5 or 6 or 7 things. We don't need another 13,000 projects. Right, what we need is what are the next 3 or 4 things? What are the things that are going to allow us to lock in and keep the progress that we've seen? What are the things that are going to allow us to compete continually in a high quality, high value, preferred access market that we now participate in? And for some context, we're a big deal as an exporter, 13.5% of the world's exports, but we're less than 2% of the world's production. Right? So in the whole big deal of beef particularly, so 75, 80 million tonnes of consumption, this year we're going to export 900,000. So normally we're after about 1.5%, but this year it's about 1%. We're just after 1% of the richest, hungriest consumers in the markets that give us the best access. That's actually all we're trying to do. So, and what we are also seeing now is our supply chain is a lot more sophisticated. So one of the reasons why the prices held up at the production sector during 2018 and 19 is our supply chain is now more sophisticated. Whether people realise it or not, or they'd like to admit it or not, or whether they're happy with it or not, everybody producing cattle and sheep and goats, it's more cattle and sheep, let's say goats too, in 18 and 19 had a much stronger connection to the supply chain and the high quality consumer than we've ever had before. And that was the big driver that pulled all of these things together. So this is why we have the plans that we do that are very focused on looking at how do we actually find these next lot of big things. So more focused, looking at a fewer number of things that are going to drive success for the industry. So these are the bits that sit behind it. So the tangible value for producers is what our main drivers are. And of course we invest up and down the supply chain, but finding those areas where we can get tangible value for consumers, for producers. The Red Meat 2030 overarching objective is to double the value of Australian red meat sales. So which has got to be price and volume, right? It can't be one or the other. And meeting or exceeding consumer demands and being the trusted source of highest quality protein. So we want to be really focused on positioning ourselves at the high end of the market. We're not going to be a low-cost producer. We're not going to be a low-cost processor. We don't need to be. Right? We're a small component of the global protein supply. We know we can produce a high-quality product. We know we can produce it consistently. Brand Australia has great value. So let's actually lean into it and get really focused on these high-end, high-value consumers in all categories, right? All categories. So we've got to sell manufacturing meat on one end, through to the highest quality product on the other. And in every category, there's an opportunity for a high quality, high value consumers. And we've got some good evidence about, our ability to find those consumers and the diversity of markets that certainly support what we're doing. And because China is something that comes up so often about challenge or otherwise for the industry. And so China's still a number 4 market for us. But if you read the press, you'd think it was a disaster. About 12 months ago, I had a call from the ABC, who crazily had just noticed that there were problems with China. And luckily I didn't recognise the number, so they left me a voice message. So I got to listen to the voice message first, which then allowed me to actually send them some slides and send them a note and say, what if you have a look at the slides and then I'll give you a call? Because their message was, we've just been thinking about China and where on earth has all this meat gone now that we can't send anything to China? Okay, except the 150,000 tonnes that we have already sent them, because they're still our number 4 market. And yes, they've come back, but they're still our number 4 market. But the reason why we didn't even notice any impact is because we send to 100 markets around the world, and this is actually what we do. We're dedicated, sophisticated exporters. Most of you probably can't remember, but 8 or 9 years ago, we lost access to the Russian market overnight. So who even thinks about Russia as a high quality market for Australian beef? We used to send them 50,000 tonnes of high value product. They're a top 5 value per tonne market for us. We lost access overnight. That was only 8 or 9 years ago. Zero impact. Because we had the ability to redivert that product to other markets which we developed relationships with, and that's what we've done with the 100,000 tonne difference out of China. Well, a big part of it's also been not having the supply either. So we've got a much more sophisticated supply chain, high quality markets, preferred access, high quality product with a better story, and that's what we've actually got to lean into, and that's the opportunity for us. When we think about our markets, this is the broad breakup. So North America and North Asia have been our 2 traditional markets, but we've obviously got significant growth in Southern Asia, and we've in all of these tables now we try and include the live export component as well, and I'll mention that specifically in a minute. The Middle East is a growing market, but it's got a limited sort of cap on it because the type of customer that we're going to there isn't the broader population, it's the high-end restaurant, high-end supermarket, richer consumers. Europe's obviously a huge opportunity for us. For the last 15 years, Europe's been our number 1 value per tonne market. So even though it's only been a smaller proportion of our sales, so less than 2% for a long time, it's been our highest value per tonne market and still is. So getting preferential access to that market with what seems to us like a lot of product, but they consume 8.5 million tonnes of beef a year. Right? So we're going to send them maybe 30 or 40,000. Right? So it's not going to have a material impact on the total amount of product, so we can send that to the highest quality consumers. We're seeing significant growth in South Asia, but our traditional markets are still incredibly strong. And what we're doing in those markets is thinking more about them as customers in cities and regions rather than necessarily the country themselves. The reason why I put live export up is we can't forget the value of live export to our total sales. So if we think about live export as a meat market, it's our number 4 market. It's worth more value to the industry than the beef trade to Korea. if something happened to the Korean beef market, you think about the press that would get, about the concern from the industry, about, you know, the hell to pay, about how on earth did that happen. Something happens in the live export sector, and most people's concern is, how do I make sure that actually doesn't touch me on none of the mud sticks as it's flying by? Right? It's an incredibly, incredibly important market for us, market sector for us, and has a huge knock-on, you know, positive, negative, you know, either way. So we absolutely can't think about it differently to our beef markets. Development of our markets over time is really important, and this is just depicting how we think about them. So on the right-hand side, you know, the high-value, high-quality markets where, you know, we're really focused on brand building, and then these are the market access areas down here. So where we think there's high value opportunities for us. In the middle are the ones that are developing, and there's a few things that are worth pulling out of the middle markets. Well, firstly, on the other side, we've got to remember that a market like Korea 20 years ago was frozen quarter beef and feeder steers, live export feeder steers. Right? And we forget that, right? Because now we think about Korea and Japan as being the same, because we send them both the same products, pretty much exactly the same products. Whereas we go back only 20 years and Korea was a frozen quarter beef. So and when I say frozen quarter beef, frozen cow quarter beef. Right? So the specs were that it had to have a C butt score. So if you could put a ruler on the butt of the cow and there was no daylight, you could freeze it and send it to Korea. That was the sophistication of the market. And they'd drag it out and chop it up, literally, with axes, and it'd go off into the wet market. And now it's the same market as Japan, right? Same sort of volume, same value, same type of product. Sitting in the middle here, we've got a country like Vietnam. It's one of our highest quality live export markets, but they've already started buying boxed beef 3 or 4 years ago, and that's increasing. But they've gone straight to grain-fed product and Wagyu product. So the ability to turn, so part of how we've got to think about our new markets is, how do we take one of these and turn them into the next Korea? So how do we support a market like Vietnam and have it in the same category as Japan and Korea in less than 20 years? And I think it's possible in 5 to 10. So we can end up with another North Asia style market like Japan and Korea, you know, with a similar type of product volume and quality in 5 to 10 years. And that's a result of the work, you know, that the industry's done in building those relationships over time. Just a couple of things about where we are. These are the latest projections, came out a couple of weeks ago. So we've revised the slaughter down, so it'll only be about 6 million head this year. So it's even lower than what we thought. But carcass weights are up, and I did these calculations the other day, but every kilo in carcass weight at the moment, it's worth a disproportionate amount of value to us. So while our slaughter's down, carcass weights are up, so our production isn't down the same proportional amount. So our production's down, but it's not down as much because of the carcass weight increase. And some of that's come from the increase in feedlot turn-off as well. So younger cattle at heavier weights. And our exports are going to be close to 900,000 tonnes, down from 1.4 only 2 years ago. Herd's going to rebuild faster than what we thought. And you look at the rate of rebuild there. But at the same time, we're going to be increasing our slaughter at a pretty rapid rate as well. So both of these increases are faster than what we've ever seen before. And so these things reflect the significant improvement in productivity that, you know, we've had in the last 5 to 10 years, which we'll see the, you know, huge benefit from now. So we're still, so even at a 6 million turn-off, significant increase in the herd, but we're going to be able to increase our turn-off next year and still, you know, keep that herd increase rate going at the same pace. And so a big chunk of the driver behind these two things is our increased productivity. And this is just a bit about carcass weights again. Carcass weights go up. I'll leave a copy of this presentation with Sally, and she can distribute to everyone. Season's looking fantastic. So we've got great prices, great demand, great season. So things are going to be good for a while. And these big macro drivers, there's nothing about them that's going to change for the next 3 to 5 years. So the people that are still talking about prices and saying prices are going to come down because they went up, right? We need to be more sophisticated than gravity. Right? There's a lot more to it than that. we're not now beholden to turn-off numbers only. We're not now beholden to the CL price into the US. We're not now beholden to the US dollar. Right? US dollar is important, right? Has a big impact on margin if you're a meat trader. But most of our traders, except if they're trying to punt it and be clever, they're going to be covered and they're going to have some security on their currency. But currency doesn't have anywhere near the impact on pricing that it used to, right? Because our markets are more sophisticated. We've got a better connection through to our end user. A shift in the chemical lean, the 90CL price into the US used to have a material impact on cow prices. It completely decoupled in the last 2 years, completely decoupled. Right? So things are different, right? Things are different. Supply chain's more sophisticated, big global macro drivers that are underpinning so much of our success, and we've got a higher quality product that's in demand into markets where we've got preferential access. Industry's in fantastic shape, despite what you might hear. Increase in protein consumption continues across all sectors. And just very quickly, I'm going to run out of time here, so very quickly, I was going to touch on it, but just this bit about protein demand, that's going to keep increasing. Now, there's going to be the left-wing red flag waving commentators that are going to continue to talk about, the world's ending and everybody should stop eating meat. But the commentary is incredibly different to what's actually happening with consumers. So we run these longitudinal studies about consumer sentiment. And over the last 11 years, the percentage of vegans and vegetarians in Australia has moved 1%. Right, 1%. So it's now 9%. Right? And it went up 1% last year. So it oscillated between 7 and 8% for 10 years, and it went from 8 to 9 this last year. So we don't want to be naive, right? I don't want to have us come back here in 5 years' time and say, yes, and in November 21 was when it changed and it went like this, right? So we can't be naive about it. But there's actually not that very many of them. Like, they're just really loud and really annoying, all right? So, interestingly, last year when we did that study, 38 or 9% of the 8% still ate meat. Like, I'm a veggie, but I do actually like meat. So this year it's gone up 1%, but that number of people who still occasionally eat meat has gone up to 53%. So there's more people that want to declare that I'm a vegetarian and a vegan, but there's even more of them that still actually eat meat every now and then. Now, it's a bit amusing, but more importantly, I think we can't be naive about the challenge of people's willingness to criticise our product and our production systems and what we're doing. We can't be naive about that, right? We've got to have a really positive, proactive approach to how we get in front of it, which we do. Right? But we also have to make sure that we don't overreact to what we see or hear. Everybody's going vegan, they're really not. All right? There are some, and they're very noisy and they're very annoying. We've just got to make sure that we can answer and get in front of their questions when we need to, which is a chunk of the work we're doing. So, you guys, this is a slide that everyone needs to say, yes, we know all about this, right? So, we're obviously breaking up our awareness and engagement programs, and Sally will be able to tell you more about these during the day if you want to check in with her. But the doubling of our funding of adoption, which is in the Red Meat 2030 plan, but we've actually done it already in our 5-year plan, and we'll actually be increasing that going forward as well. This is obviously one of our big programs, CN30. One of the best things that's actually been done for the industry in the last decade was Richard Norton sticking his stake in the ground 4 years ago and saying we're going to be carbon neutral by 2030. And he was a pretty unpopular guy when he did that, like with everybody. But it was an incredibly visionary thing to do. And when you look at the discussion now, we are in such better shape because we've had 4 years heading down this path already. So it was a great thing that was done, and we're certainly seeing the benefit from that. So a couple of things I want to touch on. Like I said, I'll leave these slides with you, but we've got 4 areas we're focusing on: this industry leadership, emissions avoidance, storage, and then integrated systems. The avoidance and storage are the 2 big areas. These are the programs that are planned to 2030, sort of the plan on a page. This gives you an idea of the investment so far, what's already committed to. So the total commitment's about 95 million up to 2025. We're still about 150 short on what we're going to need to invest over the next 10 years or 9 years to get to CN30. But what we're already seeing, and this is part of the advantage of having this 4-year run-up, is a week or two ago, there was that announcement of the Food Agility Program. They're investing $4 million in a research program around how you come up with a more economical assessment of carbon using satellites. Right, so we're already seeing other people now starting to invest in this space because they can see an opportunity to build on the work that's already being done. So encouraging those types of activities are really important as well. So we don't have to do it all ourselves. And a lot of this is co-investment as well. There's been a heap of progress made to date, and there's differing views about how this progress was made, and so it was made poorly, right? The land management changes, the restriction in clearing and the way that was done was a bad decision, right? But it's been done, right? So we absolutely should bank the benefit that came from that. And the people that are representing the organisation, quite rightly, are very fiercely fighting that it never happens again, or it doesn't happen in the same way again. But the progress is there, right? So, and our industry should absolutely get the credit for it. So, more than 50% reduction since the 2005 starting point, benchmark point. So plenty of things to do, big investment up for the next 9 years, but a lot of stuff that's already been done. And there's certainly a lot of opportunity to implement things that we already know that not only help us on this path, but just as, or more importantly, help drive productivity and profitability. And that's a really important point that we can't make enough, is that getting to CN30 is not at any cost. Right? So our industry should only be interested in getting to CN30 if we can increase productivity and profitability, provide intergenerational sustainability, and leave the environment in better shape. And we can do that, right? Because we know enough already where that's possible. I'm just going to quickly skip through a couple of these. NB2 is another example, which I'm sure a number of you know plenty about. But this is the combination of a whole group of areas of research to bring them back to focus on an output or a specific problem. So we've done heaps of research in the north, and the biggest challenge is around adoption. So there's a lot of stuff that we know, but there's a lot of stuff that is not being done. Mostly because it doesn't have to be, right? Because people are quite successful running an operation where it's reasonably low input or even with minor increased input, and they're quite successful. Right? So you have a family operation or you have a small company or even some of the larger company operations. They're doing very successful in the type of operation that they have. But from an industry point of view, there's massive, massive opportunity, and it's finding how do we make those incremental improvements or changes, and how do we get a focus on increased productivity. So coming back to what are the things that we can focus on, and essentially more calves makes a big difference. So how do we get more cows in calf? How do we keep those calves alive? And then how do we get them a bit heavier when they get through to weaning? They look like big numbers. 5% increase in weaning rate, 1% decrease in mortality, so 5 to 4, 4 to 3, 3 to 2, and 10 kilo increase in sale weight. This $20 million impact, you run out these numbers here, it equates to $100 a cow. Just if you do this. That's without all the other things that you can potentially do as well. A few of you might have seen we've done quite a bit of PR this last year on phosphorus. And I was talking about that at the NTCA conference. NTCA conference. And I was talking to a group of guys that I know really well, and they were off all large operations, and I was bemoaning our challenge with phosphorus. I said, this is information that we've known for decades, and we've still got people in phosphorus deficient areas that aren't even testing, let alone supplementing, and the evidence, you spend $1 on a supplementation program when you know you're deficient, you get $7 back. This is the easiest thing that we should be able to do in the north. And one of them just quite openly said, yeah, I've had a bit of trouble getting on the bus, but I think I'm going to give it a go. Now the guy's responsible for like 50,000 cattle. And okay, we're thinking we've told everybody about phosphorus. From an extension point of view, we're thinking everybody must know about phosphorus. But they don't. Right? So if we use that as an example, coming back to some of the simple drivers that will make a difference and making sure, and this is one of our challenges from an advice point of view, right? So we've got really cool, sexy stuff out here. We can be talking about technology and ag tech, but a dead calf has a distressingly poor growth rate, right? So we've got to get the simple stuff right as well. And it's finding the balance of these two things, which is really important for us. And this is one of the big focuses in the NB2 program. It's already funded, and that investment will run from now. But this connection with the producer groups is incredibly important, and the on-the-ground adoption or application of it is really important. So going forward in the future, doubling the value, carbon neutrality, doubling the investment in adoption, and this bit about positioning us really positively. I just want to very quickly talk about two things. So I'm cutting your program around already, sorry about that. So this is an area we're investing in at the moment. We're doing a project on this satellite measurement of biomass. So who's aware of the satellite measurement on biomass, right? In some way or another, okay? There's 6 or 8 commercial providers. And there's a few things that kicked us off on this path. So trying to get a better measure for planning and management, but also potential contribution to CN30. But when we're actually looking at how you put this sort of information together, and there's some really cool tools, right? So you can get your satellite measurement, you can have your property paddock map, and then you can use decision-making tools on the number of cattle, the type of cattle you've got, where they are, where they've been, the rainfall you've had. You can put all this stuff together and be really sophisticated in your biomass management. Talking to one of the companies that are putting this stuff together, we said, so what's the rate limiting step? And I said, well, we need a front gate address, we need a lot plan number, we need their PIC, and we need their either LPA or their MLA number. So part of the problem we have is that a lot of the PICs are registered to PO boxes. A lot of people go by their property name and they're not sure what their front gate address is. And getting people to actually track down their rates notice, which they know they've paid, but they're not actually sure where it is, to get their lot plan number from. So the biggest problem we have is getting people started. So on one hand, we have these sophisticated decision-making tools, but one of our biggest challenges in adopting this technology, which is not expensive, and it's really comprehensive, is people don't know where they live. All right. So we can invest in a new tool, or we can invest in a not very sexy solution to how people can pull this sort of information together and then access it really simply. So that's what this project is. It's about how do we find a mechanism to easily give people access to total standing dry matter, feed on offer, ground cover on a weekly or monthly basis. And that's available now. Right? But let's actually get that done or make it available to every producer. So if we can get it to work, and you imagine the power that then gives us for investing in decision-making tools, for early warning signs around available biomass, drought warning. There's a whole range of things that we can do more broadly, which will be incredibly useful. But unless we get that base level right, it doesn't matter how cool or sophisticated the decision-making tools are, we actually can't get there from here. So it's important for us to invest in things like CN30 and saving the planet, but it's also important for us to invest in things in a rise the tide, where we can all start at a higher point so that we can actually make much greater progress faster for everybody. The one thing I just want to finish on is we're looking at the moment around whether it's possible or not, but also the process of developing a animal wellbeing index. And when we think about welfare, so I reckon there's 3 sort of global showstopper issues for our industry. So sustainability and environment's one of them. So these are the things that are pre-competitive. So if we don't get in front of these as a red meat sector globally, we've got trouble. So environmental sustainability is one of them. Nutrition, consumer preference is another, but animal welfare is also the other. And a big challenge we have with animal welfare is that so much of people's perception is about a single point in time. You show somebody a video of dehorning a 3-month-old calf, And it's very hard to then say to them, and we love our animals very much and we would never do anything to hurt them. And they have the most fantastic life living on our farm. Right? If somebody's in the extreme, you show us killing an animal, which unfortunately we do have to kill them all. Right? That's an unfortunate part of the beef industry. It's then hard to actually sell the rest of the story. So how do we actually capture the lifetime positioning and say, yep, there's things we do along the way where we have to have interventions or practices which are in the best interest of the animal, and things which we might not like it doing ourselves, but we have to do them. But on a lifetime basis, how do we actually capture the fact that we look after animals incredibly well? So that's the idea of behind this animal wellbeing index. And there's been a bit of work done with some of the commercial operators as well in this space. So this is an area that we're thinking about for some future work. That's it. That's me. Oh, sorry. This was one thing I wanted to show you. There's heaps of information, right? There is heaps and heaps and heaps of information. I find it very challenging when people say you need to communicate more. It's like, no, we don't. No, we communicate heaps. We've got to be more effective with how we communicate if that's the challenge. And there is a massive amount of information available. How we actually get it together and make it, and how we actually get it together and out to people, and the availability of it is really important. So what we've tried to do is start consolidating some of this stuff together. This is the latest feedback magazine, which is a special edition, so it's not the standard format, and it's just all about positively positioning red meat. So how do you manage a social media campaign? How do you think about nutrition? Here's examples of producers doing good things. It's like 75 pages, so it's 50% bigger than a normal feedback magazine, and it links you through to a whole bunch of resources. Released red meat grain facts at Beef Australia. There was a sustainability report that came behind that. We've done about 30 producer videos of demonstrations of good things being done on farm. So we're just going to keep building these materials, and we'll just beat it with numbers, right? So the more and more and more and more we can make available and freely available. So the Good Meat website has now got a resource section in it where you can actually capture and use any of this information that might be useful for you. Now that's actually going out. All right. Thanks. Sally.